So the people wanted drama, the people wanted change, the people wanted sound rhetoric, the people wanted Pan-African rhetoric. And in many ways, Ibrahim Traore, as it stands now, represents that. But remember, his administration has only been in power for 3 years. In the life of a nation, that is a very short time. And one may say the beginning is good, but the journey is still long.
Great men are not born into a society. Great men are rather made from the society. We've seen several occasions where great men speak about their role model, and you see the admiration and the impact that those role models had in their lives. The reason why Captain Ibrahim Traore, who is the president of Burkina Faso, is motivated on carrying on a legacy is because someone set such a legacy in the first place to begin with. I always speak about Thomas Isidore Sankara in high regards, and the reason is because I've always known that the action of that man has set the blueprint on how responsible future African leaders are going to operate in the future. Creating realistic policies that will bring about betterment in the livelihood of the Burkinabe was what Thomas Sankara was passionate about. And even though he didn't live long enough to accomplish the mission that he had in mind, because he was killed by his best friend Blaise Compaoré, do not underestimate the power of planting a seed. Take your time and watch this video, guys.
The current situation in Burkina Faso must be understood in the context of history. And that history, in my view, starts from 1983 with the emergence of Thomas Sankara. When Thomas Sankara took power in what was then Upper Volta, he changed the name of the country to Burkina Faso, the land of the upright men. That was seen as a revolution, and many things happened under the leadership of Thomas Sankara until he was eliminated in 1987. We now know that one of the people who participated was a close compatriot who became the president, Blaise Compaoré, and that is in the public domain. That short stint was so dramatic in the lives of the people of Burkina Faso and in Africa that Thomas Sankara became an icon. And the rise of Ibrahim Traore is almost seen as a reincarnation of Thomas Sankara and his revolutionary fervor. And that is why he has become a poster boy for the new Africa. But let us understand how it came about. In the year 2022, in the month of January, the government of Roch Marc Christian Kabore was overthrown in January. And part of the accusation against the Kabore administration was that they had failed to eliminate the Islamic insurgency in the northern part of Burkina Faso. But Kabore did not stay in power for too long. In the month of September, in fact, in the month of September, the administration that had overthrown Kabore in January, that was the administration of Paul Henry Sandaogo Damiba. That is the administration that overthrew Kabore. He himself was to be overthrown in the month of September, the year 2022, by Ibrahim Traore and his colleagues. And the reason why I think Traore then very quickly became the poster boy was because of the decisions that he made to sever ties with France. His language was that we had remained a neo-colonial state for too long. Re-echoing what Thomas Sankara had said, his language was that we must have our own resources. If it is our uranium, let us use our uranium. If it is feeding ourselves, let us engage in agriculture that is going to feed our people. Let us ensure that we, the Burkinabe, are doing things that are in the interest of the Burkinabe and therefore in the larger interest of the continent of Africa. And it also came at a time when there is general disillusionment with the ballot. Africans had been persuaded, particularly after the collapse of the Berlin Wall, that this thing called democracy as defined by the West was the alpha and omega of good governance. You had to have multi-party politics, you had to have periodic elections, and people went to the ballot. In many cases, the ballot was not very useful because the vote was stolen. And if it was not stolen, the people who emerged from the ballot did not do anything for the people. So the people wanted drama, the people wanted change, the people wanted sound rhetoric, the people wanted Pan-African rhetoric. And in many ways, Ibrahim Traore, as it stands now, represents that. But remember, his administration has only been in power for 3 years. In the life of a nation, that is a very short time. And one may say the beginning is good, but the journey is still long. Once again, when one continues that conversation, I want us to remember that in the year 2014, in Malabo, in Equatorial Guinea, African heads of states and government came up with the Malabo Protocol that outlawed unconstitutional changes of power. And in that context, unconstitutional changes of power had to be defined, and they were defined under the Malabo Declaration of the year 2022, where the African heads of state not only reiterated what had been said in 2014, but also formed the African Court on Human and People's Rights and said unconstitutional change of power means this: acquiring power by a coup d'etat, 2, refusing to hand over power when you have lost an election, and 3, tampering with constitutional processes to extend one's life in office. So to the outside world, to your typical African leader, including the African Union, the rise to power of Ibrahim Traore is seen as unconstitutional change of power and rise to power. And that is why Burkina Faso, alongside Niger and Mali, have been suspended from the activities of the African Union. Why then are the people of Africa celebrating those who have acquired power in what other African leaders are calling unconstitutional change of power? Why is it that people who are described by the Western media and by African media as leading military juntas have become so unpopular? The reason is not far to seek. They have seen the so-called democratically elected leaders in different parts of Africa. They are corrupt. Some of them are murderous, and some of them are plain anti-people because they don't do that which is in the interest of the people. The people of Africa have seen how people who are in power retain and extend their stay in power for unnecessarily long when they are delivering nothing. And Ibrahim Traore's administration presents a hope, presents in the view of particularly young Africans a light at the end of the tunnel. And what is that light saying? That light is saying, and it can be heard through the echo chambers, saying, you the colonizers, you the French, who in 1958 pretended to hand over political power, we no longer want to be with you. We no longer want to be your latter-day slaves. Traore is being heard as saying that. Traore is being heard as saying, You, the neo-colonizers who have given us the short hand of the stick, you reap where you have not sown. You take our uranium, you take our resources, you take our minerals, and you give us a pittance. You are not going to do it anymore. You, the colonizers who handed over to us systems of governance that cannot work, including electoral commissions, including printing ballots in your own countries, including printing paper currency in your own countries, we will not allow you. He is saying that. You, the colonizers who, when we want to liberate ourselves, you create insurgency, you sow seeds of discord within our ranks, we are not going to allow you to do that. You, the African Union, who ought to be protecting us as Africans, you ECOWAS, who ought to be protecting us as Africans, you too appear to be mere lapdogs of the international order, particularly the West. To the extent that he is saying that, he is striking the right chords of a dissatisfied, disillusioned people in the continent of Africa, and their wish and desire is that there is a new dawn. A new dawn where governance will be different. A new dawn where governance will be people-centered. A new dawn where the umbilical cord between the colonizer and the free peoples will be severed. That is what, in the minds of many, Ibrahim Traore represents. And that is his appeal. Remember, throughout history, people, and this is human, always want symbols of what they are fighting about. In the struggle for independence, if you look at other nations, in Ghana it was Nkrumah, Tanzania it was Nyerere, in Zambia it was Kaunda, in Malawi it was Banda, in Mozambique it was Machel, Angola it was Neto. But this is now big because Traore has come at a time when there is what I call African Renaissance, and people want things that are pan-African to defy what happened in Berlin in 1884 and 1885. That is what is happening. He is that symbol. You know, in history, people emerge, or leadership emerges, that is defined by environment. Upper Volta had been one of the French colonies that was seen to be wedded to the Paris government, almost in the class of La Côte d'Ivoire or Senegal at one time. When Thomas Sankara came and said, we've got to recognize ourselves, and started by changing the name of the country, that was unprecedented. It was only in Ghana that Nkrumah had changed the name of Gold Coast to Ghana. This was new, this was fresh. And Thomas Sankara then was seen in that mold. A servant leader who says, I do not want the trappings of power. I do not want long motorcades. I do not want security that is a mere display of power. I want to serve the people. I don't want to ride in Mercedes-Benz or Bentley or Cadillac. I want something that is functional, something that moves. And when Thomas Sankara appears in 1987 at the OAU meeting in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and calls for our refusal to pay debts, he created a revolutionary fervor in Burkina Faso. And Traore is in that tradition. He was young then, but the stories must have been told to him of Thomas Sankara. And remember, they come out of the same environment, the military environment. They may have been trained after the style of the French, but sometimes you've got to swim in the oceans of the enemy in order to know who they are. So he grew in that environment, and when therefore he comes and says, we are leading, when he comes and says, we are not going to have the trappings of power to prevent us from working for the people, when he comes and says, my salary is not going to be increased, when he comes and says, I'm not going to be summoned to appear in European capitals, when he comes and says that the IMF and the World Bank are not going to dictate to us what to do, when he comes and says that the mineral companies of the West are not going to tell us what to do, we are going to choose our own